My name is Jesse Nolan, and I am the membership manager at the Jazz Education Network. We're delighted to have you here today for our Young Composer Showcase virtual roundtable. We will be talking with Ryan Middagh, who is the director of the Young Composer Showcase program. Additionally, we have special guests with us, including Roxy Coss, Greg Yasinitsky, Socrates Garcia, Annie Booth, Ryan Goss, and Gabe Severn, three students who are part of the Young Composer Showcase as selectees for the year 2020. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Ryan, the director of the Young Composer Showcase program, and he's going to introduce the panelists and kick us off. Ryan.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. It's really great to have all these wonderful composers and friends together. My name is Ryan Middagh. I am the director of the Young Composers program for the Jazz Education Network. I'm also a saxophonist, composer, and director of jazz studies at Vanderbilt University. And without further ado, I'll introduce this great group of people we have. First, I would like to introduce Gabe Severn, who is actually my mentee from this last year. He is a rising sophomore at Loyalstock High School. And then we also have Annie Booth, who just wrapped up her master's at CU Boulder. We have Ryan Goss. Actually, I should say Annie was mentored this last year by Greg Yasinitsky, who we also have on this call. We have Ryan Goss, who is a graduate of the New England Conservatory, one of our winners from last year. We have Roxy Coss, really incredible jazz saxophonist, composer, faculty at Juilliard, guest resident at ASU, a board member, and also the co-chair for Jen's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We have Socrates Garcia, my longtime friend and mentor, who is the director of music technology at the University of Northern Colorado and an incredible composer and arranger. We have also Greg Yasinitsky, who is at Washington State University and is a former board member of GEN and is also in charge of the GEN Commission program, which we can talk more about coming up. Without further ado, let's get to some discussion. I would really like to start with maybe some of our more, it's really interesting being a director of a young composer program, because that means I'm no longer a young composer. So I guess the rest of us are old composers now. So let's start with maybe the not so young composers. If you could think back, and maybe Socrates, let's start with you. Think back to kind of how did you get started as a composer and as a jazz composer specifically?
Okay. Well, I had been working in the music business for a while as an arranger and producer, engineer, all that stuff, and teaching. And then, after a while, I got into jazz. For me, I remember when I started engineering for a while when I was 18. My first introduction to jazz was a cassette tape by Thelonious Monk. I hated it. Because it was like, I was a heavy metal kid. And then to Thelonious Monk, it was like, oh my God. Well, the thing is, after that, I got into Chick Corea and Frank Gambale and all the fusion guys. And that was more like my thing. I got interested in jazz after that. I began working with a jazz big band in Dominican Republic at the conservatory. And then when I moved to the United States in 2004, that was it. I came to do jazz composition, jazz arranging. I did my master's and my doctorate in jazz comp. It's been a nice ride.
Very cool. So it was a jump from heavy metal to jazz, right?
Well, yeah, but the jump is kind of in flux always. Like heavy metal is still in there and jazz is everywhere. So
very cool. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how you've used music from the Dominican Republic as a part of your compositional process?
Sure. For me, I remember when I was doing my master's, Jamie Simmons too, because you started at MTSU too. And Jamie asked me one day, what new do you bring to the table? And I thought I was doing new things, at the time. I was like, oh, cool. Oh, then it's not new what I'm doing. Okay, that's what you mean. So it took me a while to get to the kind of realization of what new do I need to bring. And for me, it was in my doctorate, doing my doctorate, when I started my dissertation process, where I said, you know what about mixing Dominican music with jazz and see what happens? It had been done, for some of it, for many years, not all of it. I let's say, brought new things to the table in that regard, new styles that have not been or had not been mixed with jazz yet, at least not with a jazz big band. And I brought some musicians from the Dominican Republic to record my album, actually, and that authentic rhythm section helped a lot. You recorded the album too, so you were there from the beginning. And that blend coming from the same roots it was not that hard. I mean, it was, I guess it was natural to me, having all the jazz studies under my background, Maria Schneider, Jim McNeely, all those guys, Jim McNeely. Then, and then having all the music in my ears since I was a kid. So it was a matter of putting it together somehow, but putting it together not in a way that most people do it in the Latin world, which is mostly like, one style of music pretty much. It's Afro-Cuban music, which is great, but it's only that kind of music that what people know as Latin jazz is pretty much Afro-Cuban jazz. And then now it's evolving, of course. A lot of people from other places, all over the place, are doing different things. But for me, it was that bringing that tradition from Afro-Dominican, Afro-Caribbean music into the jazz world in my way, applying contemporary techniques, like it was not Count Basie or Duke Ellington, which I love too, but it was more on the new way of doing things that we all do, and adding those elements to it. It's that was six years ago, and you've been in the band since the beginning, so it's been great, man. It's been great.
Yeah. No, thank you, Socrates. Roxy, kind of from your standpoint, I should say that this last year, Roxy and I had a really great chance to collaborate. I had the opportunity to arrange some of her originals, and coming from someone who writes in a small group idiom, and also you do this really cool thing where you mix, different small ensembles, which I think is really great. So kind of what was the impetus for starting writing from your standpoint?
Well, I actually started composing very young, right when I started piano. I think I was 6 when I started piano lessons, and part of the method was very much based on ear training, theory, and composition. So from very young age, it was part of my practice, and learning how to even input it into the computer was just part of like, practice the piano today. And that was a part of, just my daily routine, I guess. It changed when I picked up the saxophone, because the saxophone became a main instrument, and then the piano kind of fell by the wayside, unfortunately. But I was, it was important that I had that piano background for composition. And so when I came, I think, I continued to compose through school, but the focus went to performance for middle school and high school. And then when I went to college, I found myself writing a lot more again, because I had like that space to be alone in the practice room with the piano. And I ended up taking some private composition lessons in college, as well as performance studies with Rich DeRosa. And so that kind of brought me back to that focus being part of my daily routine and my daily practice. And when I graduated, I, was faced with this question of, what do I really want to be doing? I've got this jazz degree. What does that mean? What do I do now? And so my question, the answer came back to what ended up being really my biggest passion, is to perform with my own group. And so finding that, what does that look like for instrumentation, and what does that voice look like? So I guess all of that to say, I came back to composition in a more focused way. Like you said, really focusing in on small group, and then it ended up being this quintet format, which is now usually me on saxophone, guitar, piano, bass, and drums, although I've added, special guests in there as well. So sometimes I have 6 voices, or I'll overdub myself like with a whole sax section or something like that. So I've done different instrumentation within that, and I obviously play all the doubles, so sometimes I compose for those as well. But I kind of found my biggest passion in that setting for now. Of course, everything's always changing, but definitely grateful that composition wasn't something that I had to like learn later like a double. It was just part of music for me, and I think is really part of why I chose music as a path. It was always a way to express myself personally and find my voice and have this space where I could create whatever I wanted. It wasn't like coming from a teacher in a school method. It was just like sitting at the piano and playing and having fun and, having imagination come to life.
Awesome. Thank you, Roxy. Now, Greg, for you, how did you get started as a composer? And maybe I think of you as just this world-class jazz educator. And can you maybe shed some light on how your starting in composition has informed you as a jazz educator?
Aren't you nice? Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a composer. I always wanted to be involved in music. I always wanted to be a saxophone player, but composition was always part of it. And early on, I just tried to write things out. And also we put these little bands together when we were in school, and nobody knew what to do. And basically, certainly I didn't know what to do, but somebody had to write the music out. And so I volunteered. So I would arrange for the group, or I'd write, made all kinds of mistakes, and most of the stuff was terrible. But, we played in high school with those kinds of groups. And then when I went to college, I remember to register, they said, to be a music major, you got to take this and this and this and this. And I said, okay, I'll take that. But you know what I really want to take? I want to take composition, and I want to take orchestration, and I want to take this. And they said, well, no, that's not part of this degree program. And then somebody pulled me aside and said, if you're a composition major, all that's in there. And I went, well, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I did that, and I admired a lot of composers. And what I saw was that at least of the composers that I knew, they all had jobs teaching in colleges or universities. So I thought, that's what I need to do. They were my role models. That, and I really love education and was really committed to that as well. I mean, I really knew from the time I was even in, like junior high, that I wanted to be an educator, because I admired the people who taught me so much. I wanted to be like them. So you talk about young composers, old composers. I'm definitely an old composer. And so I'm of that generation that if I wanted to study composition in school, it was classical composition. And that's fine, because that's really what I was interested in that a great deal also. But all my degrees are in composition. I have no degrees in jazz studies. Of course, you couldn't get any in those days. Mm-hmm. And I have no degrees in saxophone, but I'm the saxophone professor and the jazz studies guy at Washington State University. So I'm completely unqualified for what I do. I have no credentials. But I went all the way through and got a doctorate ultimately. First, I got a job. Well, I got the job at Washington State University. I was there almost 10 years before I went back to school to get a doctorate. But I wanted to learn more. And I was obsessed with that. And I especially wanted to learn how to write for orchestra. So I went to the Eastman School and studied with those great, Joe Schwantner and other great composers, because I really wanted to learn all that stuff. And so I got a doctorate later. And for me, composition is, of course, an art form, as we all know. But for me, it's also a craft. And I wanted to learn all I could about the craft. So I'm interested in writing music for virtually every kind of content you can think of. If I'm known at all, it's probably because I have so many educational pieces published, like middle school jazz band and high school and all that. But I've written a lot of very difficult college level, professional level big band stuff. I have chamber music, classical saxophone music, vocal jazz stuff, small group, combo music, 3 horns, 2 horns, 4 horns, little big band. I'm doing a little big band album right now. Orchestra, concertos, pops, pops arrangements, whatever it was. I wanted to be able to do that. And so that's my aspiration, and it's still what I'm trying to do. And I mean, how did I get into it? I had a teacher who said all the answers are in the scores, and it's kind of true. If you want to learn how to write for small group, man, look at those Wayne Shorter tunes, look at Joe Henderson, look at Roxy Coss's tunes, analyze them a little bit, you start to figure out what works and what doesn't. For me, I spent a lot of time looking at big band scores and orchestral scores, but particularly in jazz, especially Thad Jones. I tore all that stuff apart. I played each voicing one note at a time to see what was in each one and how all the approach chords worked and all that stuff. So, I mean, for me, that's how I did it. It's been a great thing for me. I've had a lot of luck, and it's been a fantastic career. And I love teaching. I love being at Washington State University. We got the best students in the world, and it's very rewarding. I mean, it's just a fantastic thing to do.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Now, from our old composers to our young composers. And I'll start with Gabe, because he might be one of the youngest young composers we've had. And we're still talking about this. And I kind of have a sneak peek, because having the chance to mentor Gabe this last year. Can you take us through what your composition process, especially how you composed the piece that was selected this past year?
Yeah. So I got a looping pedal a couple years back, and I would just practice just writing different chord changes. And then I got to a point where I had a bunch of different chord changes on like different loops. So I put them in the same key, combined them, and then wrote a melody over it. So that was a couple years ago. And that was the piece that I submitted, Song for Fina. That's how I came up with that. A lot of my compositions start off as loops, a lot of them, because that's a big part of my practicing.
Yeah, very cool. So the developing of the loop station, was that your starting point into jazz composition?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure when I got my looping pedal, but it was a couple years ago. But yeah, since then I've just been writing loops, and I've a lot of old loops that I might go back and look at and hopefully be able to create something out of.
Very cool. Well, we look forward to hearing that. Mm-hmm. So Annie, once again, how did you get started in composition? Especially from your standpoint as a pianist, I feel you have the entire orchestra in front of you.
Totally. I definitely, I'm grateful for this guy right back there and to get to see everything. I started writing music really as young as like 6th, 7th grade, just making up little tunes. I had Sibelius actually even back then. And so I was like kind of really enamored by that process. So I still have a lot of those early compositions, little piano pieces. But as I kind of got more serious about playing jazz piano and just more serious about jazz and loving jazz, I started writing more in high school. And then it was really when I was a college, my undergraduate, also at CU Boulder, I started arranging for like the combos that I was in and started just learning like 3-horn arranging and 4-horn arranging and just kind of some really basic, arranging principles. And I actually want to give a shout out to actually a colleague of yours, Ryan, Bruce Dudley, who was working on his doctorate at the time. And he was my combo director. And I think this story just kind of like shows me how important mentors are, because I brought in this chart to my combo and I didn't think anything of it. It was an original composition. And Bruce was like, oh my God, Annie, this is an amazing piece. Let me help you with this. Let's clean up some of these voicings. Like, let's clean up some of the range, range issues were happening and that kind of thing. So it was kind of a turning point. So I really give Bruce a lot of thanks for that encouragement, because I didn't think I was a great writer. And after that, I kind of believed in myself a little bit more and started writing a ton at that point. It was like the floodgates had opened. And then it was like no one was, exempt from the wrath of me bringing in my charts places. So that's kind of how it's been ever since. And then, I've just been really curious about all sorts of different kinds of composition, kind of like Greg said, it being a craft and kind of really trying to get into it seriously. Studying counterpoint and studying orchestration and studying big band writing has been my most recent kind of thing that I've been obsessed with, and really doing a lot of score study and learning from the greats. And then also right now I'm kind of venturing more into chamber music, chamber jazz, and orchestral writing a little bit more. So I've definitely, once the bug caught, it just kind of, I haven't been able to get rid of it. It's been kind of my thing ever since.
Awesome. That's a great story, Annie. I'll be sure to tell Bruce about that. He would love to hear that. That's great. So last but not least, Ryan, tell us how you got started as a composer, and maybe help us dovetail into kind of what your composition process looks like. I remember, so Ryan's piece from this last year was called Untitled Number One. I'm wondering, do you have a title for it yet?
No. I haven't touched anything about that piece since then, no. Well, I didn't start writing when I was 6. I started way later. So I guess sort of unusual in that regard here. But I was just sort of doing the, kind of mundane, but I was just doing like the band programs from middle school, playing saxophone. I played bass in jazz bands. And then in high school, you had to also be in the orchestra to play bass. So I was like, all right, I'll just play jazz saxophone. And I knew I loved music, and I knew I really wanted to be involved with music. And sort of similar to Greg, all my music teachers were fantastic. And like to this day, I can't even think of a bad music teacher I've had. Like all of them have been so just, inspiring and important to me. So in middle school, I sort of had the idea of like, I want to be a music teacher so I can do this too. And then when we were playing, in jazz band in high school, I wanted to get better. So I started listening to jazz, and I basically forced myself to listen until I enjoyed it, which happened. But, and then in senior year, I sort of knew I wanted to apply and do a music ed degree. And then senior year, we played 2 charts by Maria Schneider in a big band, the Wordly and Dance You Monster, my soft song. And I was just like, I need to learn how to do this. Like, it was just like, I'd never heard music like it before. We played tons of like Thad and Brookmeyer and McNeely stuff too. And that was like the moment where I was like it not only was like, oh, I really want to do this, but also I think I could do it. Whereas like, I was an okay saxophonist. I was nowhere near the best at the school and stuff like that. But I was just like, this, I think I can do, and I really want to do it. So at Berkeley, I was dual music ed and jazz comp. And at Berkeley, it was just, awesome. Starting right away, like I declared my major right away, unlike a lot of people there, and just got started, and I loved it. And then going into NEC, like I had, I'd written a bunch of charts and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I think I'm like pretty decent at this. And then getting into NEC was just like, okay, like I just threw that out there as like something to do next year. And then I ended up getting in, and, NEC was an awesome experience because also it exposed me to I almost took as many classes in like contemporary classical music as I did in jazz. So like, Ligeti, David Lang, John Adams, all these sort of people. I try and incorporate that into my music now, although Untitled Number One, getting back to that, that was one that I was trying to write differently than like with no, like I didn't, because I approach a lot of writing, what appeals to me a lot of the time is the harmony and, the melodies too, obviously, but the harmonies is what really makes me feel like pulls me in. And so I try to write one that I didn't have any harmony in mind beforehand. It was just all from like getting from point A to point B sort of linearly and melodically. And so that's different than how I usually write. But that's sort of I like the results. So that's sort of where I'm going with it now. I think that answered the question.
Oh yeah, it definitely answered the question. No, it's great. I enjoyed that piece, and I can kind of see the linear aspect of things, especially the rhythm section writing was super cool, and really love that.
Thanks.
I feel partial to this because I kind of know a little bit of the answer, but I want to know more of the answer from you, Roxy, about kind of what your process is like. And when we had you as a guest this last February, you were talking about your process on your composition Free to Be. And I thought that was very inspiring, and I would like to know more about that.
Definitely. I guess in general, I've composed in many different ways, and I find that even just mixing up your method is important because it can help the inspiration flow, which we know sometimes is not always happening. And so sometimes I'll play games with myself or challenge myself or say like, okay, I have to write this tune with, like you were saying, just the melody first, or this tune with just like a rhythmic aspect first or something like that, and then kind of fill in the gaps. But I feel like no matter what I start with, the process is sort of a puzzle. And so once you have one piece in place, the next piece has to be there. Like once you find the right answer, you know that's the right answer because it only makes sense in the story. I would say most of the time I start with chords and rhythm at the same time, and it's harmony based, and I'll get a feeling across first, and then once that starts to evolve, the form starts to take shape. And oftentimes in the chords that I'm playing, and this is usually on piano, the top voicing becomes part of the main melody, but it's not driven as much from the melody the majority of the time. I think when we talked about Free to Be, the title of the tune describes kind of what I was feeling as I wrote this tune, which is so many times I stop myself in this process, and I'm editing as I go and I'm criticizing myself as I go. And so until I feel like I've found that perfect answer, I don't write it down. And the problem with that is it number one, can take forever. And number two, you might actually lose a really good idea. And usually all your ideas are pretty good if you give them a chance to develop. So in this piece in particular, the challenge that I had given myself was to not edit until the very end, just to write down every single idea. And the first draft looked like a crazy mess because I had arrows going every which way and repeat signs and just weird symbols I had made up for myself and crossed out different things. But I felt like it really gave a chance for those ideas to develop. And what I ended up with is arguably a much more notey song composition. But I think it really is more interesting in a lot of ways than other stuff I've written, just because of the intricacy of the melodies that ended up happening. And there's, I kind of took this process a step further, whereas not only did I not edit the first draft, but I didn't really edit at all until I had written down every idea I could possibly think of for this song. And what I ended up using was the computer finale playback to add something I don't usually do. Usually I'll write 1 or 2 melodies for my ensemble, which has 5 people, but I ended up writing my melody on soprano and then a counter melody on guitar and a third, a second counter melody, a third melody line on piano. So all 3 of us are kind of going in and out of each other a little bit, which, like I said, it gets a little notey, but I think it was really fun to just force myself to not say, that's a bad idea, don't write it down.
No, I think that's great. And ever since you shared that with us a few months back, I've been trying some of that. It's hard to do. It's hard not to edit yourself right away. Be like, that's bad. Erase that. Thank you, Roxy. Greg, I'm curious about your process, especially coming from such a diverse career. Does your process change when you're writing these really intricate, difficult professional charts versus these middle school, high school arrangements and compositions?
They're kind of the same in this respect. I try and make the music as good as I can make it. I think that, and even early on, I think I had this problem when I was writing for younger musicians. I thought, you just knock this out. It's just for younger musicians. They're not stupid, They know when they're playing good music and when they're playing bad music, and they know when they're being condescended to. So it's like there's a different set of restrictions. Sometimes people say, if I'm writing for the New York Philharmonic, I can write anything I want. No, you can't. You can't write the oboe below this note. You can't write the trumpets in some crazy stratosphere. You still have these parameters you have to follow. So if it's a middle school piece, I know that the range has to be this or that. I know that the trombone players can't reach past 4th position. I know that the bass player probably has to be written in half position because they don't know how to shift yet. They're just these little restrictions. And if I keep those in mind and then try and write the best piece I can, then that works. And it's the same thing. It's best, really if I know who I'm writing for, but if I know the band's going to be great, but then there's other parameters too. How much are they going to get to rehearse? Am I just going to pass this out and they're going to play it on the spot and that's it? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? So I try and keep all that in mind. In a more general sense, I've done a lot of these sessions on, for non-musicians especially, on the compositional process, kind of where did that come from. My mother asked me once, she said, how do you compose? And I said, well, there's a band that's playing in my head and I write down what they're playing. And she said, you hear a band in your head? And I said, yeah. She said, do you hear voices too? So, it's an oversimplification, but that really is kind of it. I think part of the deal is that some aspiring composers think that the piece comes fully formed, that it's all done, that it comes to you and every detail comes out. For me, it happens in, there are kind of these general things and you fill in more and more details until the whole thing's finished. So in other words, it's like trying to sketch a picture of a room. If I was trying to sketch a picture of a room, I don't think I would, in tremendous detail, draw the doorknob first. I would, that's where the window is, and here's where the walls go, and that's where the floor is, and there's some furniture here. And then you gradually add more and more of those details. Sometimes I know the nature of the melody, but not the exact pitches. I want it to be a soaring melody, perhaps. Or I have a general idea about what the rhythm is, but not the specific stuff. And then you just keep filling in these details. I do think the rhythm ends up being, in a lot of ways, the most important aspect of it, because if the piece works rhythmically, then it's probably going to work. So my friend Dan Buckfetch, who is a fantastic composer, used to say, what are the three most important elements of music? Rhythm, rhythm, and rhythm. Of course, he's a drummer, so he would say that. But it's kind of true. A lot of times I'll start to sketch out how it works rhythmically, and then where the pitches come in and stuff, and which I know this pitch, but I'm not sure about these other ones, and then kind of mess with the pitches till the whole thing starts to work. And it's got to work harmonically. I was very, I'm trying to remember, was it Ryan, you were the one who was talking about you're really interested in harmony. I know early on, I got a lot of criticism from my comp teachers saying I was a vertical composer and didn't think about the melodies at all. Hopefully I do that better now, but it's, so it's this, I guess that's it basically. I try and, it helps for me to know what the instrumentation is, what the level is, and then that sort of frees me up to do whatever I'm going to do. If somebody just says, I want a piece, well, if I don't know what it's for, I can't do anything.
Yeah. No, I love that idea of like drawing the room and getting more and more detailed. I'm definitely going to borrow that idea in my own writing. Just for the sake of time, so we can get to as many topics as possible. Annie, I want to know kind of your perspective on kind of the mentor-mentee process and relationship, especially Greg was your mentor this last year. And if you can kind of take us through what that experience was like as part of the Young Composer Showcase.
Totally. It was one of my favorite parts, or maybe my favorite part of the experience at Gen this past January. And I got to hang with Greg. He was really generous with his time and sharing his knowledge. And I was I've known his work for a long time. And I wanted to talk about kind of the whole breadth of his work and his career and some of these things like he was just talking about. And he was really generous with offering like very specific things, like, with his really successful writing for younger musicians. And that's something I'm kind of entering into right now. And and that was it was kind of fantastic to sit there one-on-one and hear about his experience and his work and share a little bit of mine and kind of get some advice too, just like any mentor-mentee situation has. So I think that was one of the best aspects of the Young Composer Showcase. And it's something really unique and special that doesn't really exist elsewhere. So it was very cool.
If I could jump in, I just want to say that Annie is tremendously talented. Her piece was so fantastic. How you criticize, it was really great. If you haven't had a chance to hear it, you should really, it's a tremendous piece. And I know her work in general is really great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. I enjoyed Annie's piece so much that I started rehearsing it with my college band, and it's just fun. I'm hoping we can record it in the fall.
Hey, Ryan, just to let you know, we've posted links in the Facebook chat to all the student pieces. If everybody out there wants to go check those out on YouTube, you will be able to listen to Annie's, Gabe's, and Ryan's piece.
Yeah, that's great. So check those pieces out. They're all really cool. Yeah, and that's another thing that I think is really great about this process is Jen does the video recording of all the performances. We do nice interviews. So there's a lot of material that Jen has put together about the Young Composer Showcase that I encourage everyone to check out. Yeah. So Socrates, I don't know how many years you've been doing this, that you've been a mentor. Actually, Socrates, you were once upon a time considered a young composer and was one of the first awardees, I believe, from this showcase. And so can you kind of, riffing on the mentor-mentee program, can you kind of talk about who was your mentor when you were a young composer, and then how has being a mentor within this program enriched you as a composer and an educator?
Oh my God. That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
Who was it? Oh my God. That means I'm getting old. I really don't remember who was. I'm so freaking sorry. Well, then let's move on. No, I know what I learned in that whole process was a lot. I remember I had Alan Belloc playing my music. That was my first gen, actually. It was Alan Belloc's band. I'm part of the band who played my music. It was a small group, actually. It was not a big band thing. And it was a great experience, man, to learn from all the people in there, and to hear my music played by these guys. As a mentor, I've been doing it pretty much since after that. So it's been like 3 or 4 times now, and it's always a blast. I was Ryan's mentor last year, and like Greg says, I mean, his music is great too. All of them. I remember Gabe's and Annie's and Ryan. I mean, they are great music. So for me, just to talk about the music and to talk about how to do things, it's a great experience. I had great mentors myself, because I had Dick Grove. I started with Dick Grove when Dick Grove School of Music back then. He was amazing. Still, what I do today, 20 years later, 30 years later almost, is what I learned from him pretty much. Then, having Fred Sturm, for example, as a mentor was a great thing. I mean, Fred changed my music in one day, literally. I came to him as one thing for 1 hour, and then we spent 2 days together, the entire days. And then he changed. After that, it was another thing. It was a new person musically. So I think that it's important to have that person to help you go through things. People that have done the thing already and have been through a lot of other things. Like, just putting a band together, playing your music, having a record label or something, anything like that. It's important, because especially when you have a big band, it's hard to play your music and to get your music played, unless you have your band, which is insanely expensive to have.
It is.
As you all know, or you have great people, Now the fact that we have it in the schools now, that's a great experience for most of us, that you have a band to play your music. Now, what Greg was saying, depending on the band you have, you might have to adjust to the level you write for the band, for that band. But having a good band and serving as a mentor and being a mentee, it's one of the biggest things you can do as a growing composer.
Awesome. So I see a comment on the Facebook feed from Dave Fodor, who was the previous director of the Young Composers Showcase. So Socrates, I believe you're off the hook. There weren't mentors, I believe. He's saying that mentors started in year 4. So you're off the hook.
That's why I don't remember that.
So, Gabe, you talked to us a little bit about your process, and if you want to comment on your mentee relationship, you can. No pressure, as I was Gabe's mentor. But if you want to comment on that, and maybe what are some of your ideas on like some virtual collaborations for virtual composition, especially in this time of COVID and also for the future?
Yeah, so for the mentor thing, it was really nice. Like Annie said, it was a unique component, and I found it really helpful. We went through the tune, dissected it. We got it ready to play for the Commodores, which was really nice. I got to play with them. It was very, very good experience. But yeah, it was. We got to pick it apart, and it really helped me with because I'm writing a song now on Music Score with for my band Teen Town. It's just a 3-piece, but it helped me being able to get the layout and everything. So yeah, with writing it, but that was very helpful. As far as different collaborations go, online, a lot of them have come from idols. I've done Weather Report stuff, Tribal Tech, which is a great bass player, Gary Willis. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a lot more collabs with my band Teen Town now, online. But we're going to be, they're going to be coming over, and we're just going to be playing. Hopefully we're going to be getting through some original tunes, but a lot of the compositions come from our idols. So that's where we get our ideas for collaborations.
Awesome. I just want to open up anybody, especially during this time of COVID and social distancing. How are you approaching, composition and collaboration during this time? Greg, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll make it brief, but I think it's a different role for us. And I think people need music now more than ever, but it's not the kind of thing is not typically what we do. We play together, we interact together, we play as an ensemble. So how do you design? I did write something especially for this and for my big band at Washington State University, and we were locked down in the middle of March. So we weren't meeting face to face after that. So I wrote a piece that I thought they could record remotely, and it was just posted on Facebook just the other day, and it's on YouTube now. But it was really a long process and a very difficult kind of process because I had to sort of learn everything, and they had to learn everything from the ground up. They just used whatever they could to record their own parts, and then they sent me the parts. I assembled them. I had them send me video, and we made one of those kind of, videos where you see a little, that they're in little boxes there. And so it was designed specifically for the pandemic. And I'm thinking more about that. What can I do as a composer for this environment? Because it's a whole, I had to write the piece in a different way. It sounds like a conventional big band thing, but I really had to think of it differently.
How did you conceptualize it differently?
For one thing, you have to have a lot of stuff they all play together. Now, why is that? Because when you get the tracks, it becomes much more difficult to line things up because they didn't play together, right? So if they have a lot of the same figures, then you can move things around to make sure that it all lines up properly. And that also helps to sync the video so that it looks, proper. If there's a lot of, a counterpoint between all of them, we're all playing something different. They're not really playing as sections, which can be very effective, of course, especially with modern big band writing. A lot of people do that. So this was much more kind of blocky, and the tempo's very strict, and the form is straight ahead, and it's honestly, the level is not as hard as what I would typically write for the band because they had to play all their parts alone perfectly, right? So I tried to adapt it in a way so that it would be more approachable for them. I feel like it came out pretty well, so I'm glad about that. But it was, and then I had to learn audio recording software and mixing and mastering and stuff. I've been involved in a lot of recording sessions, but not as an engineer. And the video, to put that video together, it was a real challenge, even trying to find the right software for it. So, but I'm glad that I did it.
Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts as far as virtual collaboration, Ryan?
Can I actually ask, I have a follow-up question for Greg, actually. When you were because I'm thinking about doing this, I haven't done I have a piece that I wanted to get recorded this way, but just figuring out sort of logistically is sort of where I'm having trouble. So did you have them all playing basically along the click track, or did you have to resend out everything minus the solos to the soloists to play, and then do that? How did you organize the whole thing? Sort of.
I think ideally what you're describing, So the second option is the best way to do it, but because of time constraints, that's not how we did it.
Gotcha.
Going forward, if we're going to do this some more, and we may in the fall, I would have them sort of do it by sections and have the lead players do it first so that they can match with them. I sent them out a kind of MIDI, guide track, play along track, and had them play with that. And then assembled everything from there. And we added the rhythm section. I think the drums was one of the last things that we added. And then there are other people who would argue. I mean, I went to Julius Tolentino, who's on the board. He did a session on how to do this, and his advice was to have bass and drums do it first. And that's probably is better. But there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, So I just tried to deal with things the best way possible. But that's part of it, is you have to design a kind of guide track that they're going to play along with. And I overdubbed all the saxophone parts. I took my saxophone playing off and put theirs on, but it was an example for, so that the saxophone players could phrase with me and stuff.
Great.
I have a few things to add. First of all, I think I hate this stuff. I hate the Zoom and the remote recordings. It's not jazz. Jazz is supposed to swing, and swing means community. So that being said, this is my disclaimer. I hate this stuff. I'm super frustrated. But all of that being said, I've been doing a lot of different things. With my Juilliard students, they were working on original compositions over spring break, and then they never came back from spring break. So I wanted them to have a chance to hear them. And so what we did start with the bass and drums, but in the end, it didn't work at all. It was terrible, and I feel awful because nothing came together. I think that with much, much, much editing work, it could still happen, but I would recommend, I do think starting with bass and drums is great, but also having a click or something like this, because especially when you have horn parts that are like out of nowhere, or even just for the phrasing, I also, like Greg said, I recommend having like a lead player play something. Even in this group was 8 at a time. Even just having like the trumpet player or whoever has the lead melody most of the time play first, and kind of like adding people onto that. Unless, like Greg said, it's super deliberate and straightforward and unison and stuff like this. I think I had a really hard time with this. So I definitely recommend using those tricks. Wejo Mentors is a collegiate program that I'm involved with. We also had planned to have a jam session at the end of the year, which didn't get to happen. So instead, the program director, Emily Pecoraro, is organizing a Wejo Mentors big band. I'm very excited about it. And so 2 of our participants, a mentor and mentee pair, were working on composition primarily. They arranged the arrangement, and then they got the specific instrumentation of all the participants. And I think what they did was use a click, but record the bass drums and lead trumpet, and maybe one other part, maybe a trombone first, and then they're sending that track out to everybody else, and then they're going to edit it together that way. But Ryan, I mean, the track that I did for you turned out great. So I say all of that like with the context of there's great projects happening, and I think that as we get thrown into the fire, our learning curve is very steep, and so hopefully this will become something we can all use moving forward. And it's very useful because in the past, I would get called to even just record a saxophone part, and I didn't really have the wherewithal to do it, even though I have the equipment. So now I'm kind of practicing those skills. But I think the other thing I want to say, because we haven't really said it, and all of these panels that I do, I have to say this at some point, which is, it's okay if you aren't inspired right now, and it's okay not to be creating music. Not only are we grieving collectively, but we're isolated. Many of us have been ill. There's just so many factors that you don't have to be like, this isn't like time off. You're not on vacation. You're not on a composer's residency retreat. This is like a national moment to be mourning and to take pause and reflect and learn. And if we make great music and great art out of this, that's amazing. And I'm sure there will be a lot of great art out of this. But there's also that side that we have to acknowledge and not ignore, and not act like you should feel guilty if you're not producing the greatest composition ever right now. So I have not been composing at all.
I agree with that. I agree with you there, Roxy. But in my way, actually, my way to cope has been to dive into doing things like crazy, nonstop, either practicing or composing or mixing something or fixing my studio, but always doing something, watching a lot of TV, of course, like everybody else. I'm in the process actually of doing the one collaboration with my band in the same way now. And we did something like, we are doing something like that too. But my music is more, it's not swing. It's more, I can actually do a click and send it to my drummer, and then my percussionists, they record the drums, the entire drum set and the percussion. And then I sent it to my piano and bass. Once they send me that back, hopefully in the next few days, then my plan is to send it to, Brad Good and the lead players first, and then go down from there. And hopefully, it will be okay. But the music can be actually metronomic, can be actually clicked. And that's why I did it. Now, the way I did it, though, I'm an engineer. So for me, it's Greg, I have that part too, that I can actually do this other part, that I didn't have to learn that. But what I'm doing is sending everybody a Pro Tools file with all the tracks beginning at measure 1, so they can actually just line up with whatever software they have. If they don't use Pro Tools, they can line it up and send me those tracks from measure 1 to the end, and then it will be easier to put together like that. Now, that said, it's not of course, we know as composers and musicians that is not the ideal way to do it, because we like to play together and do things together. But in this situation now, it's a way people are, I think, coping and getting creative and being creative.
That's great. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts. Jesse, I think we have some questions that you would like us to address that were submitted ahead of time. Can you throw one at us?
Absolutely, yeah. So there were a number of questions about finding a mentor if you are not, part of the Gen Young Composer Showcase program. Do you have any advice on where to go? And anybody have any advice on where you might go in your local community if you were looking to find a jazz composition mentor?
I mean, I'll start with this. Your local college or university likely has someone who is really great at jazz composition and arranging. And, speaking for myself, if someone were to approach me and say, I would like some mentorship, absolutely. I feel our community, especially as jazz musicians, but specifically as jazz composers and arrangers, we really want to see the next generation and mentor the next generation of jazz composers and arrangers. And that's why we have the Young Composer Showcase as a part of Gen. So I would say, and also be listening to a lot of really great records. Find a composer that you enjoy their music. And especially in this world where everyone's living in a box on Zoom, I've been very fortunate that the jazz composition lessons that I teach, I think are actually pretty nice on Zoom, because you can share the screen, everyone can make notes. So find that composer, whether it's local or national or international, that you really admire their music, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Can I say that to that? Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
The way I got my mentorship, let's say with Fred Sturm, was like that. I was studying in Luther College in Iowa, so it was out, in the middle of nowhere. And I learned that Fred Sturm lived 5 hours away. I didn't know Fred. So I emailed Fred, and he replied, and he said, okay, let's meet in 3 months, whatever, for one lesson, 1 hour, $100. I said, okay, let's do it. Well, I waited, and we met, and then that 1 hour became 2 days. After those 2 days, he didn't charge me a cent, and we stayed friends until he died. And he became my mentor for everything I did after that. Everything I did, I sent to him, and he was always, do this, do that, change that, whatever. It was a great experience. Just like Ryan said, most jazz composers are really approachable, and they want to help. They want to help the new generation. So don't be afraid to email somebody. And, if you email 10 people, at least one of them will reply. And then you get a connection to that person. Who knows? And then that might be your mentor forever.
Yeah, I think it's important to search people out. And we all know how important it is to take lessons on our instrument. We all know it's important to study trumpet or saxophone or piano, whatever it is. A lot of times, I think in the jazz world, there's this idea that somehow you just become a composer through osmosis or something, or the fact that you play jazz makes you a composer. And it does, to a certain degree. But I think you need to study it. And I agree with Ryan that the online format works pretty well for composition and arranging, probably better than it does for saxophone lessons, for example. Because you can send PDF files of the score, you can look at them on the screen, you can make those comments back and forth. I think it can work pretty well. But it'd be better to do it face-to-face if we ever get back to face-to-face. But I would say look in your community first. There's got to be somebody that who's a jazz composer, and ask if you can take lessons for that person or just get together for a session. Ryan's advice about colleges and universities is right on the money. Because there is almost always a jazz studies person there who could help you or at least point you in the right direction. If you're really in the middle of no place, then just like Socrates said, send out email to people you admire and find out if they'll meet with you. Even if they won't, they'll probably recommend somebody.
Absolutely.
I add a few things. Everything said, I feel like that's it, and I agree. But sometimes, putting yourself out there is very important. And so not only asking for lessons, but applying to things like Young Composer Showcase, applying to these opportunities, because you'll meet people through there. Music is just about your network. Who do you know? And eventually, like everybody's saying, you just become friends because we're all sort of in this together for life. But, like for instance, I have to plug Ouija Mentors again. We are accepting composition pairs. So if you're studying composition, this is a free program you can apply for. But even, any type of camp or anything you put yourself out there for that you apply to, if you're applying to a college program, when you do your auditions, even if you don't attend that school, all of these people you meet are in the jazz community. They're in the network that you're going to be a part of, in 4 or 8 years, or how, wherever you are in your career, your educational career. So all of those people are potential relationships. For instance, when I went to college, I applied at Juilliard, but I didn't end up attending. But I met Victor Goins, who at the time was in charge of the program. I took one lesson with him, and now we have a relationship still because of that one lesson. And it wasn't somebody I specifically sought out. It was just through that process of finding that school. But this is the way that we make connections, and just to kind of continue to reach out to people. If somebody doesn't have time right now to give you lessons or to meet for coffee, still reach out to them in another 6 months and say, hey, just thinking of you again. I heard this track. All these things mean a lot to people. We're just humans, right? We're all musicians. So yeah. And in addition to lessons, if you, especially if you're, you can't afford it, or just ask this person, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I have a few questions for you about how you got where you are. And most people will be happy to say yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And also, now there are so many resources for us to study from, like books and scores. I remember with Fred, he sent me scores, a lot of his own scores, sometimes manuscripts that he said, take that, study that, and we'll talk next week or something. And now you can buy a lot of those, anywhere, like study scores from a lot of the composers. Go to their websites and find those. And, like Greg said at the beginning, most of the music is already there. It's on, the music is just go to the scores and listen to the music. And the more you can do that, the better you're going to get. At some point, you can do it. You can do a lot by yourself before you even reach out to somebody else.
Jesse, just so we can get to all the questions, do you have another question to throw us?
Yes, I got about 3 more. But before we do that, Roxy, can you share with those watching where they can get the information about WeJo and the mentorship program that you mentioned?
Yeah, the WeJo website is wearewejo.org, wearewejo.org, and we have a tab for the mentors program. It's currently just open to college students, any level but 18 to 29. We're about to launch applications for the 2020-2021 season. The applications are getting delayed because of organizational stuff, but they're supposed to be up Friday. So stay tuned for the new season of applications, but you can read all about the existing program on that website and see, past participants and all of that. So
thank you. All right, let's jump to the next question. It's a 2-part question. As composers, how do you go about getting your music played? And the 2 parts are both by groups live and getting your recordings played.
So Annie, I'm wondering if you'll take this, especially since you've developed your big band in Denver, right?
Yeah. So the first thing, just how you get your music played as a composer, I think you have to be really proactive about it. That's how I've been, is I've always, when I was in college, that's like, a no-brainer. You have this instant network of combos or big band. And you really should take advantage of that if you're in college and you're composing, because that's gold to have a big band that rehearses like that, and that can really pick apart your music. So that was helpful. And then when I got out of college, so I took a long time in between my bachelor's and master's degrees, and in that time I was freelancing as a jazz pianist and as a composer. So I had to create my own groups, and that there's a whole lot that goes behind that. But I started a trio first, piano, bass, drums, that I wrote for. And that was kind of like my main vehicle for writing for a long time. And it kind of still is. They're 2 of my best friends, and we've been playing together for 10 years. And then every time I kind of sought out a new project, like maybe a sextet project with 3 horns, I kind of like created it and curated who I wanted to play on that. Now that takes some, equity behind it. Like you have to kind of, you have to maybe fund it like a monetarily kind of way, or maybe you're getting together with a group of fellow composers and you're kind of creating like a workshop environment where everyone's kind of on the same team, and the idea is to get your pieces played. But I think that, the theme behind it is really kind of being proactive and seeking out opportunities for people to play your music. So I started a big band, actually last August was when I launched it, for a birthday show. My birthday was last August. And then last January, we started a regular gig. We only got to do 3 of them before everything kind of shut down. But that was me. That was kind of a huge adventure for me to, make the jump from leading a small group to leading a big band. And I, going back to the mentor thing, I really relied on my mentors, specifically Greg Gisbert, world-class trumpeter who plays lead trumpet in my band, has played lead trumpet with everyone, so he helped me kind of curate, all right, I'm going to help you pick out like literally the personnel. And, there's like certain things with your writing. I'm going to help you, like you should do this, you shouldn't do this. And that's been great. But, that presents its own challenges for me as a composer, because I don't get a lot of rehearsal time with that band. So, then there's that other side where it's like, as a composer, having your stuff together and having your music like as clean and as pristine as you possibly can, so that the second you give it to someone, you're not wasting anyone's time. You're not wasting, most importantly, your time. And you kind of realize that your time and your resources when you're leading a band. But I think you just have to kind of like get after it. It's like Roxy was saying, I think earlier, with just, you got to be kind of like put yourself out there, if, seeking mentors and then starting your group. And maybe a good place to start is with buddies and with friends. And like I said, like that kind of maybe a composer's network before you maybe dive into leading a big band, because that was kind of, that's kind of a big step to take. But always learning, and it's always worth it to have your music played by people in real time. Like there's no greater experience, I think, as a composer. That's like what I live for, is that moment when you get to hear it played.
That's great. Fantastic. Anybody else have thoughts on this?
I just want to,
Go ahead.
some of the things Annie said are so important to reiterate. Starting with buddies, and part of what that is everything we do, we have to practice. So you have to practice not just composing, but conducting and directing the band. And so whether you're performing in the group or not, you need something regular for a while at some point in your career. You need something, for me, it was like a weekly gig that didn't really pay in the neighborhood with my band, but it was weekly. And so every week I had to face the music that I was putting out there. And that editing process is really important, so that when you get to the point where you have a professional band that you're hiring or recording, like Annie said, it's clean, it's ready to go. You've already done that process. You're not like, how do I count off the right tempo? There's so many little things that you have to learn other than the composition, involved in composition as a career.
Mm-hmm. One thing, when I was in college, of course, at UNC, I had the luxury of having Lab 1 playing my music, so it was great. But besides that, I started a reading band. We met every 2 weeks or every week at the beginning or something like that. And it was great. Like Annie said, though, what I did was my wife made some, cookies or whatever every week, and I bought pizza for everybody, and we got together and played music. It was, maybe I only had 8 measures today, but let's play those 8 measures and let's see how they sound. Then when I had the chance to get my own big band later on, a lot of the things were already happening. Standing in front of the band for the first time, it's scary. Then until you get that scare out of you, that fear out of you, you have to do it a lot just to get it out. And then you can actually stand in front of the band and say, I can do this. I know I can do it. And just go for it. Like, Ryan, like a lot of our gigs are one rehearsal before the show. Like, 1 hour or 2 rehearsal and then the show. And it's not easy music. But when the music is well written and well laid out, there's no problem. Now we have to go through the process to get to that point.
Yeah, I think I can speak to this from both sides. Where I have my own professional jazz orchestra, and I also play in other people's professional jazz orchestras. I play Barry in Socrates' band. I think finding the right people, the right combination of people who have buy-in and want to invest, because as a professional jazz orchestra, you are investing in the people that are part of your band, however big or small that monetary compensation is. But really, these are the people who are also investing in you. So I know even like Socrates puts together a great band, but I know that sax section is everyone's practicing that sax solo as hard as humanly possible to the weeks leading up to that. And then, for me, my band came out of, we live in Nashville and we have this great studio scene. So it's just a collection of all these really great studio musicians that just wanted to have an outlet to play jazz, So I just looked around the room and said, this would make a really great big band. We should do something about that. So I know that we're running short on time, and I believe, Jesse, we have time for one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, we've got one question. It's actually about the Young Composer Showcase program. But there were a couple individuals out there asking about the criteria for the program, both from an age group standpoint and also from the composition criteria standpoint as well, if you wouldn't mind just filling in everybody about the program.
Yeah, I would love to. So we have 4 different age categories. Group 1, which Gabe was from this last year, is middle school and high school age, so ages 14 through 18. And that's all these ages are as September 1st of this year. Group 2 is undergraduate, so 18 and above. But so if you are in an undergraduate, you're studying as an undergraduate at any institution, you're in Group 2. Group 3 is graduate, which is age 21 and above, but you have to be a graduate student currently enrolled. I believe Annie was our person from this category this past year. And then a group that was added a couple years ago is postgraduate, so age 21 to 30, so we cap at 30 in the application year with completed graduation from an accredited college or university. So I believe Ryan was from this category this last year. And we have a few different composition categories. So you can, I think when we talk about jazz composition, it's easy to think about the big band and the jazz orchestra. But if you do have a small group composition like Gabe did this last year, by all means, submit it, apply for it, 2 to 9 instruments in that category. There's also the large instrumental group. And it doesn't have to be a big band. It could be kind of a mixed large group if you wanted to, which that would be 10 instruments and above. There's instrumental group with vocal solo. And what I would really love to see some applicants from is having a vocal group. So if you have that a cappella or vocal ensemble with rhythm section, you can submit that. So if you're writing for your high school or collegiate jazz choir, please submit those because we would love to hear them. Just in general, for the vocal submissions, the maximum length is 3.5 minutes. And for the instrumental selections, the maximum length is 6 minutes. And I know there's a couple people on this Zoom call who got away with a little extra long compositions. I'm looking at you, Ryan and Annie. So what's really great is, you apply for this, go ahead and submit an application for it. And what's really great is you're going to get feedback from professional jazz composers. So those of you out there who are asking, how do I get a mentor? Here's your first step forward is if you apply to this, regardless whether you get selected or not, if you're one of the 6 selectees for this program, you're going to get really quality feedback from some of the best professional jazz writers in the world. So that alone is worth it, in my opinion. And so that's whether you're selected or not. And I've heard from all the previous selectees that's been really one of the more valuable parts of the process. And then if you're selected, you get to come to the Gen Conference and you get your music performed by an incredible professional band. It's usually one of the military jazz ensembles. Sometimes it's a professional jazz ensemble. I believe actually Socrates' band was the house band a few years back. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. And if you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm really easy to get a hold of. And obviously, if you want to join Gen and apply to this, if you're under the age of 18, you can join for free. But if you are over the age of 18 and want to apply for this, you can join Gen for the college price of $24 using the code YCS2021. So join Gen. Take a look at some of these categories. Applications are open now, so you can apply anywhere between now and September 15th. So have your COVID-inspired composition. Be working on that if you want to be, or if you need to take some self-care time, absolutely. But work on whatever inspires you, whatever you're composing, and get it submitted sometime between now and the 15th. You'll get great feedback, and hopefully we'll see you at the Gen Conference.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse.
And special thanks to everybody who was part of this panel, to Roxy Coss, to Greg Yasinitsky, Socrates Garcia, and then our 2020 Young Composer Showcase selectees, Gabe Severn, Annie Booth, Ryan Goss, and of course, special thanks to you, Ryan Middagh, for hosting us, the director of the Young Composer Showcase program. Thank you, Ryan. To everybody out there, we have one more event this week. It is tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's a special event being presented by the New York Voices. They will be presenting on the topic that they call the balancing act, balancing the professional and the personal. They will specifically talk about balancing your home life and your gigging life, your work life as a teacher, as an artist, as a parent, balancing solo projects and group projects, balancing composition, publishing, recording, all of these various aspects of the music business that so many of us are involved in. The New York Voices are going to break all of those things down and discuss how you can balance those things with your personal life. So again, to everybody who is part of this panel today, thank you all so very much. We will see many of you in January at our conference, January 6th through 9th in Louisville, Kentucky. That is where we will have the next gathering of young composer selectees and mentors for the Jazz Education Network. Thank you all again, and we will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern.